Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, you're standing at the edge of endless wilderness, a place where the nearest town is 3 weeks behind you, and the next settlement might not exist at all. The forest stretches in every direction, thick with pine and oak, and the only sounds are wind through branches and the distant cry of something wild. You're a frontiersman now, and here's the thing. You probably won't survive this. Not with what you know today. Not with your GPS, your lighter, your bottled water. Out here, in the 1700s and 1800s, those invisible skills, the ones our ancestors carried in their hands and heads, with a thin line between life and death. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is in your world. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're kneeling at the creek's edge, thirsty enough that your tongue sticks to the roof of your mouth. The water runs clear over smooth stones, sparkling in afternoon light, and every fibre of your modern mind screams, "Drink." But you don't. Not yet, because you're learning what the mountain men knew, what kept them alive when cholera killed thousands of pioneers on the Oregon Trail. Water, clear as it looks, can kill you just as dead as a bullet. Your hands cup the cold current, and you lift it close, studying what most people never see. The frontiersmen of the 1820s through 1840s, those 3,000 souls who ranged the Rocky Mountains during the peak beaver harvesting years. They read water the way you read a text message, fast or slow, clear or clouded, upstream or down. Every detail mattered. You look upstream first, scanning for dead animals, animal trails crossing the water, anything that might foul what you're about to drink. The trappers knew this by instinct. Never drink below where animals water. A rotting elk carcass 100 yards upstream meant bacteria, invisible killers that the frontiersmen couldn't name, but absolutely understood. They'd seen men double over with gut-wrenching cramps, watched cholera tear through wagon trains like wildfire. The current moves fast here, tumbling over rocks, oxygenating itself. That's good. Moving water tends to be cleaner than still. You notice insects skittering across the surface, small fish darting in the shallows. Life. Where things live, water can usually sustain you. The old-timers would watch for minnows, crawdads, frogs. If they thrived, you could probably drink. Probably. But here's where it gets interesting, and where historians still argue about frontier water safety. Some sources suggest pioneers boiled everything, understanding the necessity of heat to kill waterborne pathogens. Others paint a different picture. Desperate travelers drinking straight from rivers and lakes, gambling with their lives because dehydration was the more immediate threat. The truth? Both happened. Knowledge about contamination was minimal in those days, and boiling water took time, firewood, and a pot you might not have. You dip your fingers in, taste just a drop. Not brackish, no mineral tang that might signal dissolved poisons. The mountain men developed this intuition through trial and error, sometimes fatal error. They learned that clear, fast-moving water from high elevations was safer, that springs bubbling from rock were treasures, that rainwater, caught clean, was the closest thing to guaranteed safety. You fill your canteen from the fastest part of the current, where water rushes white over stones. Tonight you'll boil it over your fire, if you can make one. But for now you drink sparingly from cupped palms, knowing that every frontiersman who came before you faced this same calculus. Thirst versus risk. Survival versus sickness. The settler families who pushed into Nebraska territory in the 1850s and beyond, they faced water challenges that make your creek look like paradise. Out on those grasslands, surface water was scarce. They'd dig test wells on potential homestead sites, dig until they hit the Ogallala Aquifer, dozens or hundreds of feet down, or pack up and move on if they didn't. Water wasn't just a survival need, it was the first consideration in choosing where to build a life. You stand, water dripping from your hands, and you understand something profound. This simple act of finding safe water, something you've never thought twice about, was once a skill that separated the living from the dead. The frontiersmen who mastered it didn't just survive, they thrived. Those who didn't? Well, you'd find their graves along the trail, marked or unmarked. Another cautionary tale about taking clean water for granted. The sun's dropping low. You've got water, for now. But night's coming fast, and you'll need fire to purify what you've collected. Time to move. Your hands are already blistering, and you haven't even seen smoke yet. Welcome to the most humbling lesson of frontier survival: fire from scratch. Forget everything you think you know about rubbing two sticks together. This is where most people fail. This is where the difference between reading about survival and actually surviving becomes painfully, literally, clear. You're sitting cross-legged on dry ground, a pile of materials arranged around you like sacred offerings. Because in a way they are. Fire was sacred to every culture that ever lived by it. You've gathered bone-dry cedar bark, shredded until it's almost powder, your tinder bundle. You found a flat piece of cottonwood for your baseboard and a straight, dry willow branch for your spindle. This is the bow drill method, the one that actually works when you know what you're doing. But here's what nobody tells you. The bow drill is hard. It's physics and friction and calluses and determination. You wrap your bowstring, a length of rawhide you've been carrying, around the spindle once, creating a loop. The bow goes horizontal, the spindle vertical, seated in a notch you've carved in your baseboard. Your left hand presses down on a smooth stone that caps the spindle's top. Your right hand draws the bow back and forth, spinning the spindle against the baseboard. The first few strokes feel promising. The spindle rotates wood against wood. Then your grip slips. The spindle pops out. You start again and again. Sweat's running down your face now, even though the temperature's dropping. This is the part where people quit, where they decide they'll just be cold tonight. But you don't quit, because you're channeling every frontiersman who ever lived through a Rocky Mountain winter. They didn't have the luxury of quitting. So you adjust your grip, keep your bow arm steady, maintain pressure with your handstone. The spindle speeds up. Smoke rises, thin, grey, almost imaginary. The smell of burning wood reaches you, and something primal lights up in your brain. Fire. You're making fire. The friction notch on your baseboard starts filling with black powder. Char dust, hot enough to glow. You keep drilling, faster now, your arm burning, your hand cramping. More smoke. The pile of char grows, smoking steadily. Then, and you'll miss this if you're not watching, a tiny ember forms. No flame, just a glowing coal the size of a peppercorn, smoking in that notch. You stop drilling immediately, carefully, like you're defusing a bomb. You tap the ember onto a piece of bark. It sits there, glowing, dying slowly. This is the moment. You fold your tinder bundle around it, the shredded cedar bark you prepared, and you blow, gently at first. The ember glows brighter. You blow again, and smoke pours from the bundle. More breath, and suddenly, whoomp, Flame erupts in your hands. You've done it. You've made fire the way humans did it for thousands of years before someone invented the friction match in 1826. Here's the historical twist that most people don't know. Frontiersmen in the 1700s and 1800s rarely used the bow drill. Why? Because they carried something better: flint and steel. A piece of flint, a C-shaped steel striker, and some charcloth, cotton burned in an airtight container until it becomes ember-catching magic. Strike the steel against the flint, catch a spark in the charcloth, transfer it to your tinder bundle, blow it to life. Faster, more reliable, and the tools lasted forever if you didn't lose them. But what if you did lose them? What if you fell through ice and lost your possibles bag, or got separated from your pack, or had to run from hostiles with nothing but the clothes on your back? Then you needed the old ways, the friction fire, the skill that couldn't be lost or broken because it lived in your hands and your knowledge. The Plains Indians, the trappers learned, could make fire in minutes with a hand drill, a simpler method using just a spindle and baseboard, no bow required. They developed the arm strength and technique through a lifetime of practice. Some mountain men claimed they'd seen natives start a fire in under a minute. Whether that's truth or frontier tall tale, historians still debate. But the skill itself? Absolutely real. Absolutely vital. Your fire's burning now, small but growing as you feed it grass, then twigs, then branches. The warmth hits your face, and you feel something your ancestors felt. Security, light, life. Fire meant cooked food, purified water, signals, warmth, protection from predators. Fire meant you might see morning. You hold your blistered hands to the flames, and you smile despite the pain. Because you've just proven you could survive. You've accessed a skill that seems almost supernatural to modern people, but was simply Tuesday to a frontiersman. And that makes all the difference. You're crouched in morning frost, your breath forming clouds in air so cold it hurts to inhale. The sun's barely up, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and you're staring at the mud near your campsite. There, pressed into the soft earth, is a story written in shapes and depressions. To you, it looks like random marks. To a frontiersman, it reads clear as a newspaper. The track is maybe 4 inches long, 4 toes visible, a depression behind them where a heel pad pressed down. Claws mark the mud ahead of each toe. You're looking at a wolf print, and it's fresh, probably from last night while you slept. The edges are sharp, no erosion from rain or wind. The wolf came close, maybe 30 feet from your fire, circled your camp, then moved on. You trace your finger along the outline, and for the first time, you understand. You're not alone out here. You never were. Tracking wasn't just a hunting skill for the mountain men and trappers of the frontier. It was situational awareness in its purest form. Every track told a story. What animal, how big, how long ago, where it was going, whether it was hunting or fleeing. The trappers who survived were the ones who could read these stories instinctively, the way you read traffic lights while driving. You stand and follow the wolf's trail. The prints lead in a straight line toward the creek. Purposeful movement, an animal with a destination. Between tracks, you notice the distance, about 3 feet. That's a trotting gait, unhurried. If the wolf had been running, the stride would be longer, the claw marks deeper, dirt kicked up behind each print. If it had been stalking, the prints would be closer together, more careful, the animal's weight distributed differently. 20 yards on, you find where the wolf stopped. The tracks cluster, overlap. Here, it paused to investigate something. You kneel again and notice smaller prints. Rabbit. The wolf had been following the rabbit's trail. You can see where the rabbit bounded. Characteristic hopping pattern, all 4 feet landing almost together, then launching forward. The wolf's trail intersects it, follows it for a dozen yards, then diverges. The wolf gave up or got distracted. This is the literacy the frontier demanded. The Shawnee tracker who taught Daniel Boone could supposedly tell not just what animal made a track, but whether it was male or female, how old, whether it was sick or healthy. Some of these claims edge into legend, but the core skill? Absolutely documented. Native Americans had been reading tracks for thousands of years, and the frontiersmen who survived learned from them or died ignorant. You find deer tracks next. Split heart shapes, walking pattern, probably a doe based on the size. No antler scrapes on nearby trees, no territorial markings. She came through yesterday afternoon, judging by how the edges of the tracks have started to crumble slightly. You're learning to read time in mud. But tracks tell more than just animal stories. You find boot prints, human, and your blood goes cold for a moment before you remember. They're your own from yesterday. Still, the reminder is stark. Other people were out here too, some friendly, some not. The trappers watched for human sign as carefully as animal sign. A moccasin print versus a boot print told you whether you were looking at native traffic or European. The number of prints told you if you were outnumbered. The freshness told you whether to run or relax. There's a quirky detail historians love to mention. Some trappers would wear moccasins specifically to disguise their trail, making it harder for hostiles to know they were white men. Others would wrap their horses' hooves in leather or cloth to muffle sound and obscure tracks. The frontier was a place of constant strategy, every detail potentially life or death significant. You find scat next, the polite term for animal droppings, though frontiersmen used earthier language. This sample is dark, tubular, full of fur and small bone fragments, carnivore scat, probably the same wolf. It's telling you the wolf's been eating well. Rabbits, voles, maybe carrion. The freshness tells you it's from last night or early this morning. The sun's climbing now, burning off the frost, and you realize you've spent an hour reading this one small area. A frontiersman would have processed it all in minutes, his mind trained through years of practice to absorb the information instantly. He'd know what animals were around, where they were going, what they were doing. He'd know if people had passed through, how long ago, how many. He'd know whether to hunt here or move on, whether to sleep easy or keep watch. You brush dirt from your hands and look around with new eyes. Every bent blade of grass, every disturbed pebble, every scratch on bark, they're all part of the language. And you're starting to understand that the wilderness isn't silent at all. It's been talking the whole time. You just didn't know how to listen. You peel off a strip and bring it to your mouth. The texture is chewy. Imagine rubber and celery had a child. The flavor is, well, it's pine. Slightly sweet, definitely resinous. Very much like eating a wet piece of wood, because essentially that's what you're doing. It's not winning any culinary awards, but it's calories, about 500 to 600 per pound, and it's packed with carbohydrates, minerals and vitamins. Native Americans and Scandinavian Sami people ate this for centuries, especially in late winter when stored food ran low. You collect more, peeling carefully, keeping your strips narrow. Some of it you'll eat raw, because hunger makes everything taste better. The rest you'll prepare properly. The Apache, Chiricahua, and Mescalero peoples would scrape inner bark from quaking aspen and bake it into cakes. Many tribes pounded maple cambium into bark bread. In medieval Europe and Scandinavia, people mixed ground pine bark with rye flour during famines, stretching their grain supplies. The oldest evidence of bark harvesting in Scandinavia dates back about 3,000 years. You gather dry wood and build up your fire. Then you lay your bark strips on a flat rock, positioned at the fire's edge, not directly in flames, but hot enough to cook. The heat caramelizes the natural sugars in the cambium. turning the strips golden brown. You flip them, watching carefully. When both sides are cooked, you pull them off and sprinkle them with the last of your salt. The result? Pine bark chips. They're crispy, chewy, slightly sweet, not entirely unpleasant. You eat them slowly, feeling the fiber and carbs hit your system. Your body's converting this tree into energy, and you're grateful. More grateful than you've ever been for food. Hunger gnaws at your belly, not the missed lunch hunger you're used to, but the deep, hollow ache that comes from burning calories in the cold with nothing to replace them. You've been in the wilderness 3 days now, and your supplies are gone. A frontiersman would have carried only dried beans and hardtack anyway. Anything else spoiled too fast or weighed too much. But even those are finite. So you're learning what the Algonquin people knew, what gave the Adirondack Mountains their name. Sometimes you eat trees. You're standing before a white pine, knife in hand, studying the rough bark. The word Adirondack comes from an Iroquois term meaning bark eater. They used it to describe the Algonquin people who ate pine's inner bark when food was scarce. That knowledge, passed down through countless generations, saved lives in winters that would have otherwise meant starvation. Native Americans would harvest bark in early spring, just as trees were budding out, cutting young, flexible branches that made it easier to strip the bark with stone knives. Your knife scores a vertical line down the bark, maybe 6 inches long, no more than an inch wide. This is critical. Too wide and you'll collar the tree, cutting off the nutrient transport between roots and crown, killing it. The frontiersmen who respected the land took only narrow strips, leaving the tree alive. Some historians note that indigenous peoples would leave a strip of live cambium, specifically to honor the tree spirits and ensure its survival. You work the knife under the outer bark, the rough, grey, inedible part. It peels away like thick paper. Underneath is the phloem, a greenish layer that's still not what you want. You scrape that away too, getting down to the cambium, a thin, white, slightly rubbery layer that's almost moist to the touch. This is it. This is food. But cambium isn't your only option out here. Hunger sharpens your awareness, and you start seeing the edible world the frontiersmen saw. Acorns litter the ground beneath an oak. You'll need to leach out the bitter tannins by boiling them repeatedly, but they're edible and were a staple food source. Cattails grow near the creek. Their roots are starchy and filling, nicknamed nature's grocery store for good reason. Dandelions, which you've always thought of as weeds, have edible leaves, roots, and flowers. Rosehips cling to thorny bushes, packed with vitamin C. The mountain men learned these foods from Native Americans, who'd been harvesting them for millennia. Some frontiersmen fully adopted indigenous foodways. Others supplemented their provisions with foraged foods. The ones who couldn't or wouldn't adapt, they didn't last. Survival out here demanded humility. The willingness to eat things your cultured upbringing said weren't food. You find wild onions by smell, digging up the small bulbs. You gather a handful of hickory nuts, cracking them between rocks to get at the meat inside. Near the creek, you spot watercress, peppery, fresh, vitamin-rich. For the first time in days, you're building a meal that isn't just calories, but actual nutrition. Back at camp, you boil water and drop in the acorns you've shelled, changing the water 3 times to remove the tannins. You roast the hickory nuts in the coals. You wash the watercress. You add the wild onions. And when you eat slowly, tasting every bitter, sweet, earthy, nutty flavor. This is survival food, but it's also something more. It's connection. Every bite links you to the thousands who came before, who learned these plants, who passed down the knowledge that's keeping you alive right now. As the sun sets and you're finally, blessedly full, you realize something profound. Grocery stores have existed for maybe 150 years. Humans have existed for hundreds of thousands. For most of human history, this, foraging, hunting, processing wild foods, was just life. The frontiersmen weren't doing anything special. They were doing what humans have always done. Learning the land, learning what it offers, and surviving by that knowledge. You scrape pine resin from your knife and lick bark residue from your fingers, and you think, yeah, you could actually do this. You could actually survive. Night's falling fast, too fast, and the temperature's dropping with the sun. You can see your breath now, thick white clouds that dissipate into the darkening forest. The sky's turned that particular shade of grey that promises rain, maybe sleet, and you've got nothing between you and the elements except the knowledge you're frantically trying to remember. The frontiersman could throw up a shelter in an hour. You've got maybe that long before the storm hits. Time to move. You're scanning for a good site, and the checklist runs through your head like a survival mantra. Not in a valley bottom where cold air pools. Not under dead trees or widowmakers. Those heavy broken branches hanging overhead that fall without warning. Near water, but not too near. Flat ground. Some natural windbreak. You find a spot where two fallen logs form a rough V shape against a standing oak. Perfect. Nature's already started the work for you. First rule of frontier shelter. You don't need walls. You need a roof and a heat reflector. The cold kills more than the wet, though wet and cold together will kill you fastest. You're building a lean-to, the most basic overnight shelter in the frontiersman's toolkit. Simple enough that you could build it in pitch darkness if you had to. Many did. You start collecting materials, dead branches, long and relatively straight for your ridgepole and ribs. You find enough to lay a framework, one horizontal pole lashed between the two fallen logs, then shorter poles leaned against it at a 45-degree angle, creating a slanted roof frame. The historical record shows that trappers and mountain men could build these structures with nothing but a knife and cordage. You're using paracord from your emergency kit, but they would have used leather strips, plant fibers, or even twisted bark. Next comes insulation. This is what separates an okay shelter from one that might actually keep you alive. You need debris, lots of it. Pine boughs are your first choice, layered like shingles starting from the bottom and working up, each layer overlapping the one below, so rain runs off instead of through. You pile them thick. A debris shelter should have insulation at least 2 feet deep to trap air and create an actual thermal barrier. Your hands are numb now, clumsy with cold, but you keep working. Pine boughs, then leaves, then smaller sticks to hold everything down. More boughs, more leaves. You're building a beaver dam of plant material, and you're racing the sky. Thunder rumbles in the distance. Inside the shelter, you spread more pine boughs on the ground, thick as a mattress, because ground cold is insidious. It'll suck the heat right out of your body while you sleep. The frontier settlers who built their first log cabins often had nothing but dirt floors, and they'd layer them with straw, pine needles, anything to create a barrier. Even in a permanent cabin, that ground cold could kill you. The first drops of rain hit just as you finish. You crawl inside your lean-to, and it's tight, claustrophobic even, but that's good. Less space to heat. You build a small fire about 3 feet from your shelter's open face, then construct a heat reflector behind it, using green logs or a wall of stacked stones. The fire warms the air. The reflector bounces that heat back toward you. The lean-to traps it. This is frontier HVAC, and it works. Rain comes in earnest now, drumming on your pine bough roof. Water runs off the shelter instead of through. Mostly. A few drips find their way in, but you're dry where it counts. The fire crackles and pops. Heat builds in your small space, and for the first time in hours, you stop shivering. This moment, this warm, dry, relatively secure moment is what separated the pioneers who made it from those who didn't. The ability to create shelter quickly, efficiently, using only natural materials and basic tools. It sounds simple until you're actually doing it, with frozen hands in failing light, while a storm bears down. There's a historical quirk worth mentioning. Many frontiersmen, especially trappers, slept in the open, even in winter, using only a blanket and a fire. They'd build a long fire, parallel logs that burn slowly all night, and sleep between it and a reflector. No shelter at all. These men were so accustomed to the elements that what would kill a modern person was just another Tuesday for them. But they also knew when shelter was necessary. Pride didn't keep you warm. Smart choices did. The log cabins that eventually dotted the frontier, those weren't much more sophisticated than what you've built tonight. 300 square feet, if that. No foundation. One room. A hole in the roof for smoke. Dirt floor. Gaps between logs chinked with mud and moss. They were temporary shelters, built fast, so families could focus on clearing land and planting crops. Only later, sometimes years later, would they build the plank houses, the barns, the structures that signaled permanence. But on the first night, in the first storms, those settlers huddled in structures barely more elaborate than your lean-to, and they survived. They survived because they understood something fundamental. Shelter doesn't have to be comfortable. It just has to keep you alive until morning. The rain's steady now, almost soothing. Your fire's holding against the wet. You're warm, well, warm enough. Your shelter smells like pine and wood smoke and earth. And despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the lingering hunger and the dozen aches in muscles you didn't know you had, you feel something unexpected. Pride. You built this. You, with your soft, modern hands, created shelter from nothing but knowledge and materials the forest provided. You settle back against your pine bough bedding, watching firelight dance across the crude walls of your shelter. Tomorrow brings new challenges: navigation, food, the endless work of staying alive. But tonight, you're sheltered. Tonight, you've proven you can adapt. Tonight, you sleep like a frontiersman, secure in the knowledge that the old skills still work. They've always worked. That's why we're still here. You wake to grey dawn and a fundamental problem. You're lost. Somewhere between building shelter and surviving the night, between focusing on immediate needs and forgetting the bigger picture, you've lost your bearings. The sun's hidden behind clouds thick as wool. No landmarks stand out. The forest looks the same in every direction. Just trees and more trees, endless and indifferent. Your modern brain wants to panic. Your frontier brain says, slow down, look, think. The mountain men who ranged across the Rockies between 1820 and 1840 navigated thousands of miles without compasses, or at least without relying on them. They read the land the way you read street signs, and they almost never got truly lost. The key wasn't magic, it was observation. Constant, detailed, multi-sensory observation. So you start observing. First, moss. Everyone knows moss grows on the north side of trees, right? Well, yes and no. Moss grows where there's moisture and shade, which often means the north side in the northern hemisphere, but not always. Not reliably enough to stake your life on. You check several trees, and sure enough, moss grows heavier on one consistent side. Probably north. Maybe north. It's a data point, not a certainty. Next, the trees themselves. You study the bark patterns, and you notice something subtle. On one side, the bark is slightly rougher, the branches slightly more gnarled. This is often the north-facing side, which takes more weather. The south-facing side tends to be smoother. The branches fuller because they get more sun. Again, it's not absolute, but combined with the moss, you're building a picture. The sun breaks through clouds for just a moment, and you mark it mentally. Mid-morning sun, so that's east-southeast. You find a straight stick and plant it vertically in a patch of dirt. The stick casts a shadow, and you mark the shadow's tip with a small stone. 15 minutes later, the shadow's moved. It's shorter now, pointing in a slightly different direction. You mark the new tip with another stone. The line between the two stones runs roughly east-west. The first stone is west, the second is east. This is the shadow tip method, and it's been teaching direction to lost travelers for centuries. But the sun disappears again, clouds rolling back in, and you need more. You need the kind of signs that work day or night, sun or storm. So you look at the vegetation. Where slopes face south, they're drier, warmer. You'll find different plants there versus north-facing slopes. In the northern hemisphere, snow melts faster on south-facing slopes. Stumps show growth rings that are often wider on the south side, where the tree got more sun. Anthills tend to be built on the south sides of trees for warmth. You're assembling clues like a detective. No single sign is definitive, but together they tell a story. This is what the frontiersmen did instinctively. Daniel Boone supposedly once told a fellow hunter, "I have never been lost, but I will admit to being confused for several weeks." Whether that's historical fact or frontier humor, historians still debate. But the attitude is real. Getting confused was acceptable. Panicking was fatal. Water flows downhill, so streams lead to rivers, and rivers lead to settlements. If you're truly lost, following water downstream was often the frontier survival strategy of last resort. It might take days or weeks, but eventually you'd hit civilization, or at least a major waterway, where you might encounter trappers or traders. Night's coming again. Your second night out here, and you need a more permanent direction marker. You find an open area with a view of the sky and wait for darkness. When the stars finally appear, you search for the most reliable navigation tool in the northern hemisphere, Polaris, the North Star. You locate the Big Dipper first. That's easy, distinctive. Then you follow the two stars at the far end of the Dipper's cup, extending the line they make about 5 times the distance between them. There, a moderately bright star, not the brightest in the sky, but steady and reliable. That's Polaris. That's north. Unlike every other star in the northern sky, Polaris barely moves. It marks the celestial North Pole. Every frontiersman, every sailor, every traveler knew how to find it. You mark north on the ground with a line of stones. East is 90 degrees to the right. South is opposite north. West is 90 degrees left. Now you know. Now you can plan. The frontier wasn't mapped like our world is mapped. There were no GPS coordinates, no detailed topographic charts. Men traveled by watershed, by mountain range, by days of walking. 3 days north on the Platte River, then west to the ridge where the pine trees grow tall. That was navigation. Distances were measured in travel time, not miles. Landmarks were natural features, not street names. The trappers who survived were the ones who paid attention constantly. They'd note unusual rock formations, distinctive trees, the way valleys opened up or closed. They'd memorize terrain the way you memorize your neighborhood, and they always knew which way was home. You settle down for the night, your stone compass laid out beside your shelter. Tomorrow, you'll pick a direction and stick to it. Circling, the cardinal sin of lost travelers, happens when people panic and ignore their navigation tools. So you won't panic. You'll trust the signs. You'll move deliberately. As you drift towards sleep, You think about how utterly dependent you've become on technology. Your phone's GPS, your car's navigation, your assumptions that maps are always available. But out here, none of that exists. Out here, you're navigating the way humans navigated for most of our existence, with sky and land and careful observation. It's slower, it's harder, but in its own way, it's more honest. You're not asking a satellite where you are. You're figuring it out yourself, one clue at a time, the way your ancestors did. And weirdly, surprisingly, you're finding your way.
Fever burns through you like wildfire, and you know, with the clarity that comes from desperation, that this is where most frontier stories ended. Not with dramatic wolf attacks or grisly maulings, though those happened. Most pioneers who died did so from sickness, infection, diseases we can cure today with pills you don't even think about. But you don't have pills. You have a forest, and whatever knowledge you can dredge up from the survival part of your brain that's been dormant your whole modern life. Your head pounds, your body aches. You're burning up one moment, shivering the next. Could be a dozen things. Bacteria from water you thought was clean, an infection from that cut on your hand you dismissed as minor, or just the cumulative stress of cold, exhaustion, and inadequate food. Doesn't matter what it is, matters what you do about it. The frontiersmen faced this constantly. Without modern medicine, they relied on plant knowledge, passed down through generations, and learned from Native American healers. Some of it was superstition. Some of it was surprisingly effective. The difference between those two categories kept people alive or killed them, and knowing which was which took experience most pioneers didn't have. You drag yourself to the creek, force down water despite your roiling stomach. Dehydration kills faster than almost anything. You need to stay hydrated, even if it means forcing every swallow. Then you start looking for plants you recognize, plants that might help. Willow trees grow along the creek, and you strip bark from a young branch. White willow bark contains salicin, the natural compound that became aspirin. For countless generations, Native Americans, including the Cherokee, used it to reduce fever and aid restful sleep. You shave the inner bark into strips, drop them in your pot, and boil them into a bitter tea. It tastes like hell, astringent, woody, medicinal. But you drink it anyway, grimacing with each swallow. Within an hour, the pounding in your head dulls slightly. The fever's still there, but the edge is off. You're functional enough to think clearly, and that's what matters. Clear thinking keeps you alive. Next, you search for yarrow. This plant ranked as the #1 herb used medicinally by Native American tribes, and with good reason. You find it growing in a sunny meadow. White flower clusters on tall stems. Leaves so finely divided they look feathery. The green leaves contain a powerful blood coagulant. You examine the cut on your hand, the one you dismissed days ago, and notice the red streaks radiating from it. Infection. That's probably what's causing your fever. You crush fresh yarrow leaves between your fingers until they're pulpy and moist. Then pack the poultice directly onto the infected cut. Yarrow was collected before battles to stuff into open wounds to slow bleeding, relieve inflammation and pain, and to disinfect. The Greek hero Achilles supposedly saved his warriors this way during the Trojan War. That's where the plant's scientific name, Achillea, comes from. Whether that's myth or history, the plant's effectiveness is real. You also brew yarrow into tea using the flowers and leaves. It was drunk as tea for headache, digestive distress, fever, and to help the body eliminate viruses or bacteria through perspiration. The tea's not pleasant, bitter, pungent,
but you drink it warm, feeling it work through your system. Yarrow is diaphoretic. It makes you sweat, helping your body purge whatever's making you sick. By the creek, you spot plantain, not the banana-like fruit, but the broadleaf weed that grows everywhere. Native Americans used crushed plantain leaves applied to burns, and it works for bee stings, insect bites, even mosquito bites, taking away pain and itch in minutes. You've got mosquito bites covering your arms and neck, itching like mad. You crush a few plantain leaves and rub them on. The relief is almost instant. The itching stops. The inflammation calms. It's such a simple remedy that you almost laugh. This weed people spray out of their lawns is better than anything in a pharmacy for this purpose.
The cut on your hand throbs less under the yarrow poultice. You secure it with a strip of cloth torn from your shirt, checking it periodically. By evening, the red streaks have stopped spreading. The infection isn't gone, but it's not winning either. You've bought yourself time. There's a quirky historical detail worth noting. European settlers were already familiar with herbal medicine. They brought medicinal plants and knowledge with them to North America. But they also learned from Native Americans, integrating indigenous remedies into their own healthcare. Cherokee traditional medicine provided numerous medicinal plants that were adopted by European settlers, including yarrow, black cohosh, American ginseng, and blue skullcap, plants still used as herbal medicines today. The mountain men who survived were humble enough to learn. The ones who dismissed native medicine as savage superstition often died from preventable conditions. Pride is expensive in the wilderness. You gather more plants as the light fades. Wild ginger root for nausea, pine needles rich in vitamin C to brew into tea, oak bark with its astringent tannins for diarrhea, if it comes to that. You're building a pharmacy from the forest floor, and every plant you recognize feels like reclaiming forgotten knowledge. That night you sleep fitfully, fever still present but manageable. Your body's fighting whatever invaded it, aided by compounds synthesized in leaves and bark over millions of years of plant evolution. Modern medicine isolated these compounds, refined them, mass-produced them, but the originals are still here, still working, still available to anyone who knows where to look and how to prepare them. By morning, the fever's broken. You're weak, exhausted, but alive. The infection's clearly on the retreat. Your makeshift medicine worked. Not perfectly, not like antibiotics would have, but well enough. And well enough is all survival ever asks. You change the yarrow poultice on your hand, brew more willow bark tea, and force yourself to eat some acorn mush despite your queasy stomach. Food is medicine too. Rest is medicine. Clean water is medicine. Warmth is medicine. Everything conspires either towards survival or toward death, and you're choosing survival. One plant, one decision at a time. The frontiersmen who made it through disease and injury weren't superhuman. They just knew which plants helped and which didn't, which infections could be treated, and which were death sentences. When to rest, and when to push through. That knowledge gap between knowing and not knowing filled countless graves along the frontier. But you're not filling a grave today. Today, you're healing. And that's enough. You scrape flesh from skin with a dull stone, and the stench is overwhelming. This is hide tanning, the process that transformed dead animals into clothing, shelter, rope, and containers. Without it, the frontiersmen would have frozen the first winter. With it, they thrived in conditions that should have killed them. But here's what nobody tells you. Tanning a hide is disgusting, exhausting, and takes days of work. It's also absolutely essential.
The deer hide in front of you came from an animal you found already dead. Predator kill, probably. Not ideal, but you'll take what you can get. First step, fleshing. You've stretched the hide over a smooth log, hair side down, and now you're scraping away every bit of fat, meat, and connective tissue clinging to the inner surface. Miss even a small patch and that spot will rot, ruining the whole hide. Your hands cramp, your back aches. The scraping tool, a dull stone with one sharpened edge, keeps slipping, but you persist, because you've been cold every night, and leather means warmth. Every frontiersman understood this equation intimately. Once the hide's clean, you face a choice. Do you want leather, flexible, durable, or rawhide, stiff, strong? Each requires different processing. You're going for leather, which means brain tanning, the traditional method Native Americans used for thousands of years and taught to trappers who were smart enough to learn. Here's the weird part. Every animal carries enough oils in its brain to tan its own hide. Nature's perfect system. You didn't save the brain from this deer, but you've got alternatives. Eggs work. Animal fat works. Soap and oil work. The mountain men sometimes used a mixture of brains, liver, and soapweed boiled into a paste. You prepare a tanning solution. Water, some rendered fat you've saved, wood ash for alkaline content, and you work it into the hide with your hands. The hide needs to soak in this solution, absorbing the oils that will preserve and soften the leather. You work it thoroughly, massaging the solution into every part of the skin, then roll it up and let it sit overnight. The next day comes the hardest part, breaking the hide. As leather dries, it becomes stiff, unusable. You have to physically work it while it dries, stretching and manipulating every inch to break down the fiber bonds and create soft, pliable leather. This is where most people fail. This is where tired arms give up and the hide turns into cardboard. You throw the damp hide over a rope stretched between two trees. Then you pull it back and forth, working it like you're buffing a giant shoe. Your arms burn, sweat pours down your face. The hide slowly, agonizingly slowly begins to soften. You find softer sections and work those areas less. Focus on the stiff spots. Keep moving, keep pulling, keep stretching. Hours pass, literally hours. The hide's drying unevenly. Some parts still damp, others getting stiff. You have to stay ahead of the stiffness. Work each section as it reaches that critical point between damp and dry, when the fibers are malleable. This is why hide tanning was often communal work. Multiple people could trade off, keeping up the constant work required. But you're alone, so you push through. Your hands blister, then bleed, then go numb. The hide's transforming though, becoming buttery soft in places, pliable, beautiful. This is buckskin forming under your hands, the material that clothed frontiersmen from the Appalachians to the Rockies. Finally, after what feels like forever, the hide's soft throughout. You've done it. Created leather from rawhide, using nothing but primitive tools and persistence. But there's one more step. Smoking. Without it, your leather will turn stiff again the first time it gets wet. You dig a small pit and build a fire in it, letting it burn down to coals. Then you add damp, rotten wood. Punk wood, they called it, which produces thick smoke without much flame. You construct a frame over the pit and drape your hide over it, creating a smoke tent. The hide needs to smoke until it's tan or brown throughout. The smoke's chemicals permanently altering the hide's structure, so it stays soft even when wet. The process takes hours. The smoke's acrid, choking. Your eyes water constantly. But you tend the fire, adding more punk wood, adjusting the hide to ensure even smoking. By evening, you've got finished leather. Water resistant, soft, durable. You've turned death into utility, waste into survival gear. The historical record shows that a skilled Native American woman could fully tan a hide in about a week, working on it periodically between other tasks. Mountain men who mastered the craft took similar time, but many frontiersmen never learned properly. They relied on trade, buying processed hides from Native Americans, or paying someone else to do the work. Those who could tan their own hides had a significant survival advantage, especially when isolated or far from trade networks. From your one deer hide, you can make moccasins, a small pouch, leather cord for lashing, repair patches for worn gear. Native Americans made entire buffalo hide teepees, parfleches, rigid containers, shields, drums, clothing, everything from one animal. The frontier economy ran on leather. Before cotton mills and textile factories industrialized clothing production. You hold up your finished hide, admiring the supple texture, the even tan color from smoking. Your hands are destroyed, blistered, cut, aching, but you've just created something that might keep you alive through winter. Something you can wear, trade, or use. Something made entirely with hand tools and knowledge that predates civilization. This is the skill that separated permanent settlers from failed colonists. Log cabins need leather hinges, leather lashing, leather window coverings. Shoes wear out, you need to make new ones. Bags tear, you need to make repairs. Horses need tack, people need clothes. Everything requires leather, and leather requires knowing how to process hides. As night falls and you examine your work by firelight, you realize you've completed a circuit. You found water, made fire, tracked animals, foraged food, built shelter, navigated by stars, used plant medicine, and now created leather. These 8 skills, mastered over 8 hard days, form the foundation that kept frontiersmen alive.
Not all of them. Many died. The graves along the Oregon Trail, the abandoned homesteads, the forgotten trappers who never returned from their expeditions, they're testament to how hard this life was. But some survived. Some thrived. The ones who learned, who adapted, who respected the knowledge of those who came before. You wrap yourself in your new leather, still warm from smoking, and you finally understand. The frontier wasn't conquered by superior technology or manifest destiny. It was survived by human beings willing to learn skills that seem impossible until you're forced to master them. By people who carried knowledge in their heads and capability in their hands. You've become one of them, at least for these 8 days, and that knowledge, those skills, they're yours now. They're always there, sleeping in your DNA, waiting to wake up the moment they're needed. The old ways aren't lost, they're just forgotten. And anything forgotten can be remembered, one skill at a time, one day at a time, one survival challenge at a time. Tomorrow, you'll start the journey home. But you won't be the same person who wandered into this wilderness. You'll carry these skills with you, and the confidence that comes from knowing, if you had to, you could do it again. You could survive. The fire's burning low now, just glowing coals painting soft orange light across your camp. Your temporary home that you built with your own hands from materials the forest freely gave. And as you settle into your pine bough bedding, the forest around you feels different than it did 8 days ago. Not threatening, not alien, but almost familiar. Like reconnecting with a very old friend you'd forgotten you knew. The skills you've learned weren't really learned at all, were they? They were remembered, pulled up from some deep ancestral memory that lives in all of us. The knowledge of water and fire and shelter and food, of reading tracks and finding direction, and healing wounds and creating tools.
These aren't modern skills or primitive skills. They're just human skills. The ones we carried for hundreds of thousands of years before we built our cities of glass and steel. Your breathing's slowing now, syncing with the gentle rhythm of the forest at night. The soft rustle of wind through pine branches, the distant call of an owl, the pop and hiss of dying embers. And you realize that every frontiersman who ever slept under these same stars felt exactly what you're feeling. This profound tiredness that comes from honest work. This satisfaction of aching muscles and blistered hands. This peace that settles over you when you know you've earned your rest.
The skills aren't gone, they're just sleeping, waiting patiently for the moment we need them again. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's enough to know they're there, to know that if everything modern disappeared tomorrow, humans would adapt, would survive, would remember, because we've done it before. We've always done it. It's who we are beneath the technology. Let yourself drift now. Let the warmth of the fire and the softness of the pine boughs carry you down into deep, restorative sleep. The kind of sleep that comes after a day of real work, of real challenges met and overcome. And as you fade, remember, you carry these skills with you always. They're written in your bones, whispered in your DNA, waiting, quietly, patiently, ready whenever you need them. Sleep now, frontiersman. You've earned it. Sweet dreams.